To resume, we're going to continue our session. That is the legal framework in favor of education for girls and women. And two presentations will be made, and after that there will be a discussion. And since it is the same person who will make the two presentations, we will give her this opportunity, and then we'll move to the discussion. I will start with Dr. Ruth. I would like to invite her to make her presentation on the strategic framework for the implementation of the legislation on the right for girls and women to education. You have the floor, madam. And and after that, she will do a presentation on the legal framework or the legal guidelines for the education of women and girls. You have the floor, madam. Thank you.
Vice President, Pan-African Parliament, other presidents present, honorable members of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm here to present the legal framework focusing on girls and women's education at international level and at regional level. It is important for us to be seized of this information so that as we talk about the girls' education, we are not talking about something which is abstract, but something which is mandated, not only by the law, but also as an obligation as African citizens to empower the girls and women in the continent. Now, most of these instruments come in the forms of treaties, some come in terms of protocols, some are declarations, some we refer to them as charters. But either way, they have a weight. As I start my presentation, I'll go deeper into that later. But I want to assure you that based on the content in all these instruments, education is considered as a basic right for individuals. And because it is a basic right, and for that matter, fundamental right, each and every citizen must therefore have access to education. Not just education, but quality education that transforms our lives and able to make us be better citizens to develop our country and ultimately the continent and then the world at large. Now, unfortunately, education has been skewed towards our male brothers. This is not to say we are discriminating when we are focusing more on the girls' education, but just to let you know that there are challenges in terms of ensuring girls' access, they are retained, and then they complete their education. So the reason why we are focusing more on the girls is that the reality on the ground is that women and girls are disadvantaged. And therefore, something else, something greater and radical must be undertaken by our governments to ensure that girls and women are at par with our brothers. Now, at international level, I've already informed you about that, and it's an effort at national and even the AU member states towards achieving better education for girls and women. However, the effort that has been put at national level by the AU member state is not commensurate with the rate at which they ratify or domesticate this legislation at national level. And the question we'll be asking, which is presented more in the second presentation, if these instruments exist, there's commitment at national level. Why is it that women are still lagging behind? And just also to give you a background to why we want to talk about not just gender parity, you know. We want to talk about gender equity in education. That then we get leverage in terms of how we are going to focus on how we put our girls and women at par with our brothers. When we just talk about just equality, it's like give them the same education, and that's enough. Forgetting that women come into this education with the baggage. You know, as a young girl, me as I grew up, when it is time like to do homework in the evening, we'll be called to go and wash dishes, do other things when our brothers are free and they can play. But for the girls, it is different. So if we don't come with this background information, then it becomes difficult even to implement, because we have to understand the deeper problems that women and the girls face in accessing education. You know, because these are some of the reasons why we cannot be able to retain them in the schools. And that's why also the rate of completion is also very poor. Now, the climax. Where is it? Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, the climax towards the girls' and women's education was sparked by the World Forum Education Conference in Thailand, the Jomtien Conference. This is the conference that was the first one to ever recognize that girls' and women's education is lagging behind, and then there's need to do something about it. That was in 1999. And then in 2000, we also held the World Forum in Dakar, which also was taking progress on how countries, that was 10 years later, the progress that had been made since the declaration made in Thailand. And it discovered that despite those commitments, little was done to improve the position of women in the education sector. And therefore, again, the Pan-African Conference in 1993 in Ouagadougou also like looking at what was happening after Jomtien and after Dakar. What else? Is he not checking?
Sorry, he said you can, let's see.
Okay. It was supposed to control from up.
Okay, let's see.
I've gone so far.
Is it moving?
No. It was controlling from up. This is why we need to teach women technology. You can see the, okay. Thank you.
You have to show your
It's not,
point it.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
Is it okay? Okay, I think I've already explained up to there. In 1993, I was explaining about the Ouagadougou Pan-African Conference that was a precursor to and a follow-up to what we are doing now. They This is an African context, an African conference that speaks to the African experience in the African context. So they understand the need to address the girls and the women education in the African context. They know the challenges. And these challenges, if they are not addressed, then there's no way we are going to achieve the parity and even the equity that we are talking about in education for girls and women. And what basically the conference did was to reinforce the conclusions that were done in Jomtien, and then also the Dakar conference, and it encouraged African heads of states to take drastic measures, whether legislative, policy programs, to ensure that girls and women's education were given priority in terms of what they do at individual country levels. Now, these are the, I selected a few, not all of them, because this is a compendium which is work in progress. We cannot bring everything, but we selected the core documents that is a must for us to be seized of, to deeply understand, to be able to implement at national level what is required of us as a country, as a continent, as the whole world, to make the world a better place for girls and women. So, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Then there's the CADE, Convention Against Discriminations in Education. God, it's so challenging. Then you have the CRC, which is the Convention on the Right of the Child. We have CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And then we have the Beijing Platform for Action. Then we have the World Declaration on Education for All, which is the Jomtien that I've talked to you about. Then at regional level, at the African level, we have the Banjul Charter, which is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And then Maputo Protocol, which is the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the rights of women of Africa. And then we have the ACRWC, which is the African Charter on African Charter and African Charter Rights and Welfare of the Child. Then the AYC is the African Youth Charter. SGDA is the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa, and then the African Gender Policy. There are many others which I have not put there, but we'll look at them. And before I go to that, I need you to understand something here. Sorry. Okay. I want you to look at this diagram. Some of you are more conversant with international treaties and or have interacted with issues of how countries bring international law to the level of their domestic system. You need to understand how it's done so that you do not say, okay, even if my country has not ratified, I don't care, we do not have to implement. The first step that at a forum like this, people come to understand there's an important document which you have to come up with or develop on education. Now, once you have developed at a forum like this, you'll have representatives from all countries. Then if they agree, they'll append their signatures on behalf of their countries. Now, at that particular level, they're only confirming it is a good document, and we need all member states to sign this document. So it reaches a level now that it binds members of the African Union. Or even if it is the UN, the process is the same. Now, once you append your signature, you'll go back to your own country and follow with the legal instrument and we call it ratification process for those who signed at the very beginning in the first meeting. So once you have signed, once you've gone back to your country and you develop a legal instrument, usually done at the AG's office, then it will be conveyed to the respective depository office by the Foreign Affairs Ministry in respective countries. So each country will sign that instrument and deposit it with the relevant office. If it is Africa, it will be the African Union Commission. If it's the UN, it is with the Secretary General, signifying that you are signed, you have ratified now, you are committed to the provisions stipulated in that instrument. And then you'll come back at your own home level now to come with legislation through your parliament to domesticate. Now, accession is the same as ratification. The only difference is that when you're acceding, it means you are not part of the system at the very beginning. So you cannot ratify or validate what you didn't participate in. So what you will do, you'll be acceding and say, yes, I was not present, but I find this instrument so important for my country, and therefore it is important also to adopt it to help me implement at national level. So the process is the same. Then domestication is another level of commitment. Now you transfer that whole document or leave some sections which you are not happy with, and you bring it at national level through an act of parliament, through your parliament, like you people here. You come with a legislation that now says, now, country B, our parliament has passed this law and it has been assented to by our president to say that we are going to implement to the letter. Whether it's about the children's right, whether it's about the education for girls, then now, once you have committed, it means that we can hold you accountable, you know? And even if you have not domesticated, we can hold you accountable at the national level because you have signified, and at the international level, at the international forum, you are showing the whole world, I am happy to be associated with the instrument. But when you go home, you do not do it, okay? But what ratification and accession help us with is that we can engage with the state and the relevant committees. For example, CEDAW has a committee, and this committee receives reports from countries on progress they are making in terms of implementation. So if you have ratified or you have acceded to those instruments, when you're reporting, you can be put to task to tell the committee why, after so many years of ratifying or even domesticating, you are not implementing. What are the challenges and what else can be done to help you overcome the challenges? So it is important because then we can hold them accountable and tell them you have to do this, give them time frame within which to do specific things. So it is important that if you've not ratified and you're present here, please try and ratify or accede. And then domestication, I've already explained. Implementation is just the process, as I'm saying. Do something, create programs, many other things to ensure that what you've ratified or what you've acceded to is working at the national level. And then maybe also to clarify, there are treaties. Treaties are international legislation which once you've ratified are important and they are binding. Your country or your citizens can take you to court, you know, and hold you accountable on that basis. Declarations, however, are not binding. You know, we cannot hold you accountable for failing to implement a declaration because declarations, we just take them as gentlemen and ladies agreement. But because you think it is important, it has not reached the level of a treaty, we'll try and implement, okay? But it has reached a level that where countries have only made declarations, they try to implement provisions that are in the declarations. I think with that explanation, I'm now good to go. Okay, this is the first and important document for education. It is Convention Against Discrimination in Education and Recommendation Against Discrimination in Education. This is a UNESCO document that was developed and adopted in 1960. So you can see the problem of education has always been there. And it has been there because, you know, education is a critical resource. It is the only resource that generates other resources. Without education, you cannot get employment. But if you have education, you get employment, so you are able to generate income to do many other things. And that's why it is very important as we speak here, and as even as I heard other speakers in the past few hours, they have been very passionate about the importance of education. And the reason why we need to educate women, because they make a whole difference in the entire stratum. So this document, what it basically does is that it encourages it emphasizes, puts a lot of emphasis on elimination of discrimination in education. And it says that every person has a right to education. When you talk about every person, are women persons? Are men persons? If you're all persons, then we are all entitled to education. And we should not use culture to discriminate. We should not use our political affiliations, our religious affiliations to discriminate at whatever level. But does it happen in reality? Do we discriminate in reality? Yes, we do. Do we refrain from discrimination as mandated there? We don't. And this is the reason why we have to keep reminding ourselves about the provisions in the legal instruments to make us know or to make us feel guilty it is wrong and we must change tact. I think I'll not go into details. I highlighted quite a number of issues, and Dr. Rita will make this presentation available to you people, so I can just do on the summaries. When you talk about the UNESCO Constitution believes that there is we need to believe in full and equal opportunities for education for all. So when you talk about opportunities, opportunities is a very broad term, and you cannot talk about opportunities at a higher level before you start the lower level. And trees don't grow from the branches. They also don't grow from the leaves. When you plant, there is a root, and it is the root that anchors the branches and the leaves and the stem. So if we have to look at elimination of discrimination, we have to look at the deep root causes of discrimination to be able to get where we need to go with our girls' and women's education. When you talk about also discrimination, what emphasis is put on countries that most of African countries, for a long time had constitutions that discriminate on issues of personal law, issues of culture, and issues of devolution of property upon death. Now, when we look at all these things, the most affected person is the woman. When you look at issues of personal law, what happens? I do not want to paint a grim picture, but you know what happens in reality. The personal law is what prescribes what a woman can do and what a woman cannot do, and what men are allowed to do. In fact, they don't have things that men are supposed to do. Men are supposed to do everything, but women have the don'ts and the do's. And because of that, they will always hide within the culture to inhibit women's empowerment. So that if you try to go or you want to cross the line and be a little empowered, they'll start questioning, you know, why is this woman, why does she want to be different from the others? So you either be labeled sometimes, or you'll be called, if you're too tough, they'll call you our other brother, our other sister, who is like a brother to us. Because you're challenging the dichotomy of what a woman should be and what a man should be. So when you cross, they do not know how to define you. And all this, we grow as girls, internalizing them. And sometimes we don't blame the men because we've internalized them. This is what we see. This is what our mothers have experienced, so you also try to be like them, you know? But because of lack of knowledge, lack of information, and lack of education, that creates all this. That makes us believe that there are others who are more important and others are less important. And the less important ones are the women. But I want to tell you, women are so important in the society. Why? Because the woman is the tractor of the home. She can go anywhere. When it is raining, she can wade through the rain. When it is flooded, she can go through the flood to get the family members. When the family members are hungry, she will sacrifice her own food and give the family. When the budget is so tight, she'll know how to restrain herself and ensure that the family gets. So, therefore, women can do budgeting, they can lead, because they're already living in their houses. But we do not want that simplistic definition of a woman, of the role that they can do within the family. Can we make a difference by ensuring that we don't discriminate them in the education sector to make them better people for the family, for the nation, for the continent, and for the world? And I think all these instruments that I'm alluding to, they all talk about elimination of discrimination. So if I read all of them through and through, I think I'll be doing you'll be bored. So I'd rather maybe just summarize and move on. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, this I told you is not a binding. I told you declarations are not binding. But I want to explain this is different. Universal Declaration of Human Rights has reached a stage where it has acquired a status of international customary law, so it is considered as a treaty. So all prescriptions which are there have been used to develop other treaties. So generally, all countries adhere to the provisions that are in it. So it's not like Beijing Declaration, but it is of a higher value in terms of declarations. Now, Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the first ever document in the world to mention issues of discrimination. And it talks about equality between men and women. And it says that all human beings must be treated with dignity. So when you're discriminating someone, you are actually lowering their dignity as humans. When we prescribe what is good for someone and what is bad for the other person, when this kind of prescriptions we are creating, this empowers the other person and empowers the other one, is a problem. Because the person you're disempowering also must contribute to development. If you are saying we are all members of the universe, say it with dignity, respect, and therefore we should all be in one basket. But when it is convenient, you decide to remove one from the basket. When it is convenient, you also bring them back. Why double standards? Because the law is very clear. We should eliminate discrimination. The universality of human rights says we are all equal. All our rights are interdependent. So if you want me to enjoy right to political participation, I cannot enjoy it because I need education to be able to have leverage to get there. If I want to have good health, I need more education to learn more about nutrition and even make informed choices to have good health and then ultimately enjoy right to life. And that's why I said education is very critical. When you are informed, you can make informed decisions. You can also run away from those decisions which are bad because you're already informed and you're not living in a parochial society. And for us, we know that it is easy to control a parochial members of the society, so you'd rather have the status quo maintained. And what Dr. Rita has been doing is to ensure, no, let us sensitize people, let us bring to the attention of the people of Africa that there are instruments, there are treaties that exist at national level, continental level, regional level, that we must adhere to, uphold them, and ensure that we fulfill the obligations that are created within these treaties. Convention of the Rights of the Child, it is a convention which is focusing on the children, and it is ensuring that children live dignified life. And then you must also not see children just as children, because how they are thinking matters. Their development matters, and therefore it is important to give them education, both girls and boys. And we talk about developing the youth. We want to say the future belongs to our youth. How can the future belong to our youth if you're only educating one segment of the youth and then we're abandoning the others? We have to give equal education to both girls and boys, and we must also ensure that those cultural elements that make us discriminate against either of the children are modified. We should avoid issues of unnecessarily empowering our boys by making them feel that they are more superior than our girls. And even where I come from, it is easier when school fees is so tight, they can withdraw a girl from school and they let their brothers go. Or even if the son is not performing well, but the daughter has passed, she will be recalled and told, no, you cannot bypass your brother. You have to wait. Why? Because now the society treats our brothers with superiority, and they feel that if the woman is educated, there's no benefit from the society. But they feel like it's only going to benefit from, she's only going to benefit where she's married. But I also want to just pose this question. Do men marry? And if they marry, they also bring strangers into their home. So his education is also benefiting a stranger, if you want to call that a stranger. So we should ensure that all these strangers that you bring to our lives, we balance them wherever locations, positions where we are. So it is important we start teaching our young children the value of education by giving them good education, quality education that also allows them, that treats each other as equals, not one superior and one inferior. And the key things there, which I've already explained, is about issues of non-discrimination, best interests of the child, and then children should survive and develop their full potentials. And when you talk about full potentials, what refrains or retrains girls and boys from participation are cultural things. And a good practice is FGM that allows young girls to be withdrawn and get married because they've already passed the majority age and therefore ready for marriage. Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. This is a key document and we call it the Women's Bible because it is the first ever UN document to focus about women. It was born from the fact that the instruments that were initially developed, that is International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, International Convention on Economic and Social Cultural Rights, did not have specific reference to women. They were too general, so it becomes very difficult to implement what the women or girls needed. So with the advocacy came this convention, which was very specific and addressed specifically only women's issues. And it also talks about issues of discrimination and mandates state parties to ensure that they eliminate discrimination, either through policy measures or legislative measures, to ensure that men and women enjoy equal rights. And it is also the first instrument to talk about affirmative action. And that affirmative action, when we go to the best practices our countries are implementing, you'll see how it is being implemented at the university level, at secondary level for girls in some of African countries. To ensure that they bring girls to the same level with boys in terms of accessing positions. There's someone who is controlling. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay, the key important things about CEDAW is that, if you can go back. The key important about CEDAW is about it embodies the principle of equality between men and women. And Article 10 of the Convention, of the Women's Convention, is very categorical about focusing on education of the rural women. Someone talked about we are empowered here, but what about the rural women? That is taken care of by this instrument. And therefore, even as we're trying to talk about education, we should be looking at that very little child in the rural area. And even sometimes, even in the urban areas, there's a lot of problems in the slums or high density places. They face the same problems of insecurity and poor infrastructure as they go to school. Again, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It's more of how countries, our socioeconomic rights can be enhanced at national level. It focuses on a number of issues other than education, such as health. But we also need that. If you're not healthy, you cannot go to school. For young girls, you know how reproductive health affects their access to school, you know? So it is important that when you see countries implementing those programs of sanitary towels, it is a key challenge because there are some parents who cannot afford. So when a small girl is in menses, and then she goes to school, and then the little boys see, and even the girls, it becomes an embarrassment, you know? And they will not go to school for 3-4 days, and they'll miss school. So meaning they're left behind, you know? So when we take into consideration all those things, not just about legislation itself, but looking at the nitty-gritties that can be done to really unpack the law to make the education as a right a reality for girls and women. Who is? Then there's also the issue of the consent of marriage. It is important for us to look at this instrument, the United Nations document, because it was the first ever to create the minimum age of marriage. It pegs it at 18 years. The reason why it is important that if you're going to marry off girls when they're under 18, then it means you're not only interfering with their access to education, but also their retention and completion. Once I get married, there'll be so many questions. I'll be asked, who are you going to leave your husband for? Who are you going to leave your children for? So it is important to ensure that we adhere to this provisional requirement of putting age of majority at 18 so that we give room for girls to go to school. And then the World Declaration for All and Framework for Action, this one already mentioned. I think I can skip that one. It's the one for Jomtem and the Dhaka Declaration. I can skip them. Then at the AU level, these are documents which you are very familiar with. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Banjul Charter. Sorry, I get confused. There's someone controlling up there. Okay. This Banjul Charter, unfortunately, it has very good provisions, but we all understand when the document was developed, it was purely a political document to liberate Africans from colonialism and then to be autonomous and independent from the colonial rule. So you will not find so many details about girls and women's education. The only reference that you can find is Article 18 that talks about women, and therefore there's very little to pick from there. But it also emphasizes issues of discrimination. We should eliminate discrimination in the system. And then the protocol to the charter, this is the most recent and the best in Africa because it is even better than the UN document. It is made from the African content and context, understands African problems based on the women's perspective. So it is a document we can be proud to be associated with and would like our member states to implement to the letter. It requires the states to do so many things: education, and also to combat discrimination against women through legislation and other policy measures, to promote literacy among women, training, and many other things. Then the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child are similar provisions to the UN Convention on the Right of the Child. I will not get deeper into this one. It is as similar provisions like what I'd already explained. Then the African Youth Charter This is an important document for African Union because it recognizes that Africa cannot grow without investing in the youth. So they have dedicated this charter to ensure the African youth's potentials are tapped at a young age as they grow, so that when the elder brothers are gone or the older sisters are gone, we have a youth that can take over. It talks more about intergenerational linkages. How do we build the capacities of the youth in Africa? How do we how do we develop their potentials to make them better people? How do we refrain them from getting into drugs, into bad things, to be able to be better citizens in their respective countries? So it has a lot of programs that are supposed to be done for them, and especially, and why I like this thing, because it's emphasizing about education, free education for girls and boys in the continent. And we should be looking at not only free primary education, but all secondary and even university. I think they're very detailed. Going to skip some. And then you have the solemn declaration. And the reason why this one is important is because it has a provision that allows African member states to report at the African Union on the progress they're making in terms of implementation. The Maputo Protocol, or the African Charter on the Rights of Women of Africa, does not have a provision for that, of tracking its own progress. So that challenge has been cured by the provision in the solemn declaration, so that you get states to report on the progress they're making in terms of women and girls' empowerment, and what challenges they are facing and how they intend to overcome them. Then we have also the African gender policy. It is more about gender mainstreaming, and it's mainstreaming in all sectors. And it is this document that talks about 50-50 gender parity. And then I'll just stand here and ask, if you want about gender parity of 50-50, how is that going to be amenable if we don't develop the potentials of girls and women? Girls and women are still lagging behind. So how will you want to get someone to hold a portfolio which she does not have competency? So it is very critical for us to focus more on the girls and women's education. Not only for girls, but for women, because at a certain age, this girl will grow to be a woman. And then when she's a woman, and she doesn't have the competencies, she doesn't have the skills, how do you expect her to fill the position of a director at the African Union, or a minister within her country? So it is very critical. The Nairobi Declaration is about the African Women's Decade, where African Union heads of state committed to ensure that they want to close the gender gap, and they want to see by 2020 how far they would have gone with women empowerment in the continent. And part of the commitment in that declaration is also women's and girls' education and eliminating gender-based violence, which is a big problem in institutional or educational institutions. Then Agenda 2030 of the SDGs, which is as Goal 4 and 5, has similar provisions almost to what the African Union Agenda 2063 has on aspiration number 6, which talks about empowerment and ensuring that you develop the potentials of women. You don't leave them behind. And the key thing is also eliminating gender-based violence and issues to do with health and quality education for girls and boys. I think Ogadu, I'll pass it. I told you it was the climax, and it's what we look at when we want to see the declarations which are very specific in Africa or even in the world that we use as the stepping stone to do what we are doing now. And then the Addis Ababa declaration, this was just like taking about the Beijing Plus after the review. So what? Are countries doing something? And then from the outcome, what are countries committing to ensure the provisions that are there are implemented? And this with particular to education, how are countries faring on? And I want to say that all these instruments is not new to all of us. Our countries are aware about them. The only problem is implementation. They make very beautiful commitments, but when they go home, we don't see this commitment translated into reality for women. So what can we do to help women realize this benefit? Because the states have three obligations. They have obligation to respect, and respecting means that they refrain from acting in a way that violates those rights. And when they protect, it means when there's a violation, there's a remedy. And fulfilling simply means that they have to create an environment in which these rights can be enjoyed. When you talk about rights of education, the states have an obligation to create the physical structures for the schools, provide programs, ensure that the environment in which girls are learning is safe. That they'll be fulfilling, because it's not good enough to put that legislation, but you do not create the environment through which this right can be realized or beneficial to the people that the instrument is supposed to protect. Otherwise, we'll be doing an exercise in futility, and it is high time we make our commitment real for the benefits of women and girls. I thank you. Now, the next presentation is about okay. The next presentation is about the strategy. I've already outlined for you the instruments and how countries are supposed to, how countries are implementing or not implementing is the next segment. But even from my own discussions, even as I was explaining the instruments, you already know those challenges. So I do not need to repeat. Maybe the best thing that I can do is to tell you that we are not really a very bad continent. Within the continent, there are best practices. Maybe you can just highlight a few of them, or two or three. There are some good practices we find. For instance, in Tanzania, it's called COBET, complementing basic education. There's someone who talked about, in fact, I'm mentioning that because someone talked about dropouts. How are we dealing with people who started school but they left, or they didn't go to school because one reason or the other, but now they're adults? How do we deal with them? Now, Tanzania has a program that is sandwiched, that specifically caters for women who are either already married or in areas where they can't go to school, but it is sandwiched for them, so they do not have to appear like they're in a learning environment with the others, but they are able to complete school at a shorter period, like in 3 years instead of 8 years. So this has encouraged more women to go to class, and then there have been, there's been marked changes in terms of the performance. And then there's also a program in South Africa. We don't have to mention it. Okay. There's a program in South Africa which is focusing on mentoring girls. It is creating an environment where girls can talk about the challenges that they are facing in school, reproductive health problem or sexual problems, so they can speak with their peers. Those who have dropped out because of pregnancy, they are brought back, they're able to talk, they get encouragement, and they go back to school. And then also, they're empowered with life skills, how they can deal with issues of violence in the school, and also issues of HIV/AIDS. Because you know, our girls they're not maybe sexually active, but because some of them are young, but their bodies are big, so they can be prone to attacks. You know, they get pregnant in the process. What happens? Are we going to abandon them to the oblivion? No. We have to encourage them to wake up and move on with life. And then there's also a program in Burkina Faso about mapping schools. Because of the long distances girls have to walk, it becomes a security issue for them. So in Burkina Faso, there's been mapping done within the rural areas. So you create a small school for girls, not really only for girls, but at least now that mapping is targeted towards ensuring that people who are in very far places and walking to school is a big challenge, they create a small informal school for them to learn. And maybe through that system, you're able to tap more talent than if you have to leave them to go to the normal formal school, which is also very far. But even in this other school, they are taught, you know, they're taught programs that are taught in the formal school. And then in the Gambia, because of security issues, they built perimeter walls to ensure issues of sexual harassment and violence within the school is mitigated. And also in Kenya, in Zambia, in fact, almost all African countries, there's affirmative action in terms of admission to the university. They lower 1 point or 2 points. Like in Kenya, they lower 2 points for girls. So it's easier for them to access. At primary level, there's basic education, which is free for all. I'm happy in almost all countries. And even in countries which are emerging from conflict or emergency situations, like Egypt and Libya, there's a good program that is emerging there, so that even in disaster periods, you don't stop people from learning. They're still able to continue. And then there's also, there are many, and because I told you I needed to focus more on the instruments, because these challenges, you know them. The best practices, you're from Africa. You know what you're doing, what is working best in your countries. And then there's also this program where most governments in Africa have, returning pregnant girls back to school so they do not lose. When I went to school those years, it was so difficult. If you got pregnant, you'll be suspended, and that is the end of you. Now it is more, they're sensitive. You can even go back to the same school. But because you do not want to be stigmatized, they allow you to move to other schools. And you'll get a letter from your own school to take to the other school. So that how, somehow when you go to the other school, these people do not know why you've transferred. It can be for anything else. So there's no stigma. So this encourage. I think this is a plus, and we should clap for African governments. You know, because it was meant like if you just got pregnant, that was the end of your life. But there's not a lease of life, so women can be happy and they can continue. And I think I can speak and speak, so I think I need to stop here and we can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for that elaborate presentation. I'm not going to do you a disservice by making any summary of what you have said. Most of the instruments we are very well conversant with, and there is abundance on the continent on best practices for improving and making education accessible to girls. So, colleague, members of parliament, I think we shall now open the floor for discussion. And may I entreat you that we give preference to those maybe who didn't have chance this morning to make their views heard. That is not discriminating against those that took the floor, but maybe for this second round, we'll give preference to those that have not spoken this morning. In that light, I will call on the first hand that I've seen up, my dear Honorable from Sahrawi. Thank you. Then you. Okay.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank you, Madam Vice President. I thank the presenter. In fact, this is a very interesting presentation, and it is essential in building up countries. I do remember a poem by Hafez Ibrahimi, the Arab poet, who says that a mother is a school, and if you take care of this school, then you would prepare a good people. So this is why we should focus on the education of women and girls. But as far as I'm concerned, there are two more elements that should be taken care of. That is the family. The family is the first cell where girls are usually would usually develop. And if the family has provided a good education to girls and based on non-discrimination, then the girl would evolve and would constitute a real school for the future generations. The second issue is that governments must set up policies, which would promote the capacity of girls. And it is also necessary to have policies which are based on making education for girls compulsory and based also on the non-discrimination between girls and boys. All our schools in the Sahrawi involve girls and boys studying together. There is no discrimination, and also we're promoting equality between boys and girls. We have girls who travel to other countries in order to pursue their studies. So I think that this theme is essential in order to develop countries. But in conclusion, I would like to say that we Africans should not suffer from any complex of inferiority from the West. And Europeans are still denying women a lot of rights, and this is not the case in Africa. We must also set up basis for the promotion of girls and boys, for the promotion of the education of girls. Thank you very much.
Yes, Honorable Kone. After that, my honorable from Sudan. Kone, honorable can. Let's take Honorable Kone from Côte d'Ivoire, and then we'll take Honorable from Sudan behind you. Thank you.
Merci.
I thank you. I thank you, Madam Vice President, for giving me the floor. In most of the classrooms in Côte d'Ivoire, there are more girls than boys. The fundamental problem, to my mind, is not schooling, but is keeping these girls in schools at a certain level, and particularly after the end of the primary school and the beginning of the secondary school. In Côte d'Ivoire, we started considering the law on compulsory education or schooling. This was initiated by imams, and the imams of my city told me that this policy that you have embarked on will lead to a lot of girls becoming mothers. And of course, ignorance is the cause. And I would like to thank Mr. Sultan Hashim from Sudan, who has recalled that Quran encourages learning and education. So I think that we should do is to start by sensitization. And I started carrying out a crusade against those who are fighting or who are trying to prevent girls from schooling. And we should not think or believe that this phenomenon is related to religion. And some imam in our village have even mentioned some passages of Quran which encouraged education. And although some chiefs in the villages discouraged girls from going to school, laws are enacted and implemented by our populations. We must focus on awareness when talking about legal framework. I think that we should not only stick to law, but also carry out campaigns of awareness. To conclude, earlier I heard that young girls are called to go and bring water and also do the washing at home while boys are free. I think that we should avoid raising this problem that is a kind of putting girls against boys. I think that there is a complementarity, and we should not present them as adversaries, because the small boy also would bring back the chicken back home or the cows instead of studying. So we shouldn't really present them as adversaries or rivals, but encourage them to work together in order to be able to encourage their emancipation, both of them. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I thank you, Madam President. I thank the presenter for this information that she has shared with us. We are discussing an issue of paramount importance to humankind, that is the education of girls. The girls are the educators and are at the basis of the family. And if we want to look at this theme, then we must sensitize our societies about the importance of education, and particularly rural societies, because in the cities there are a lot of educated girls. And in this respect, it is necessary for those officials in charge of education to put education as a priority. And the presenter said that a lot of girls living in rural areas do cross important distances in order to go to school. I must say that it is necessary for us to encourage education in rural areas, because in rural areas, people live out of agriculture, and this is the sector that contributes to the economy of the country. So we must educate this rural manpower in order for girls to know how they can handle modern technology and implement it in agriculture, and how they could also breed livestock. I have an initiative. We in Africa have those nomads who would move from a place to another according to the rainfall, and also the need for animals looking for grass and water. So it is necessary for trainers who would accompany nomads in order to educate the boys and the girls of the nomad. And we in our country have implemented this initiative, and it has been successful. Now, as for education, education is spread throughout the whole country, and in every region, every province, we have primary schools that are spread. We have also colleges and the strengthening, and also our daughters or girls are much more successful than the boys in schools. But still, we do need assistance, material assistance, because economies find it or are facing difficulties in Africa. So we must set up clear legal frameworks that would back up and promote the education of girls. Thank you.
Honorable from, yes, our honorable member from, is it Zaire? Yeah.
From Seychelles.
No, not you. Thank you, not you. Yeah. Yeah, Chad.
Merci.
I thank you, Madam Vice President. You have waken up all these minds and the spirits of Chadian since our great-grandfathers up to now. I have listed all the women who have been heads of state up to date, and to date, we haven't had many women who have become presidents or queens, and much less than in South America. So it is a political problem, and it's not a matter of discrimination. I think that I had things to tell to my friend from, I don't remember, from Côte d'Ivoire, and he has summed up the situation. Our problem is a problem of power. There is no country in Europe or in Africa. In Europe, they take care of all women and men, and even this parity between 50% men and 50% of women does not exist. Why do you want us to implement this in Africa? I can tell you all the theses that are developed or defended by the Westerners are wrong. Today, I have 5 children. And I have, and before that, I have had 16 sons and daughters. One of my daughters became a minister. It's the fate of each one of them. While I have 3 wives, one who has never been to school, another one who is a teacher, and all my grandchildren have been very successful. So the girls now are lecturers at the university. So there is no problem of conflict. So, and there is no situation where a father would support the son to the detriment of the daughter. We must avoid creating any problems within households. And the most important issue here, we must note that we are trying to promote democracy, and we are being blocked, particularly by terrorism, and also by Europeans who are funding this terrorism. So when it's Europeans who kill, then we congratulate them. But when it's the others, we condemn them. I think that we are on the right path. We are on the right path, and we're training people, but we do not have jobs to offer. We have a lot of graduates, but we can't offer them jobs. So it's not women or men are not to blame, are not to be blamed. So, and whenever we're given money, we try to fight one another. We are on the right path, and no person in Chad or in Côte d'Ivoire would favor their daughter or their sons to the detriment of their girls.
Four people in the line, after which we will go to the rest of you. So it's Sudan, Rwanda, and then is it Egypt? Is it Egypt? Egypt. I have already alerted them. After that, we will now go to Seychelles. Thank you.
شكرا سيد الرئيس بسم الله الرحمن
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah. We all agree that the right for education is one of the basic human rights, so both for men and women. And this is something that we should reaffirm at the outset. We must also agree that we must identify the causes of this problem very precisely in order for us to come up with the solutions. But the issue is it an issue of concepts, or is it an issue that has to do with cultural, social, or economic problems? And the question would be another term: is the woman given the same opportunities that are given to men as concerns the right for education? I will speak about this issue, but I would like to share with you the experience of Sudan on this issue. People have said that religion is one of the causes which have made girls or have prevented girls from access to education. All religions are calling for freedom and for access to education. These are only excuses in order to prevent girls from the right to education, sometimes because of religion and other times because of early marriage, and sometimes because of economic factors, in order for girls to help, for example, in the household. So are all these reasons, if these are the right reasons which prevent for girls, can these reasons be sorted out through legal instruments? I think that the title of the workshop needs to be reconsidered, because all these laws cannot really help us sort out these problems. It is awareness which can really help us spread awareness that education is the key for the promotion of women. For example, in Sudan, we do not have laws that are compulsory on girls' education. And despite all that, most of those who are successful at the university are girls. And and it is also the girls who are very successful. In scientific faculties, the girls outnumber the boys. And when I was in the Faculty of Science, and the number of girl students is much greater and is much higher. And I don't think that the laws alone can really help us overcome this problem. As Doctor has said, there are some disciplines where girls do not have access. In Sudan, for example, such as civil engineering or technology, where it was thought that girls cannot have access to such discipline. But this is not the case now. I think that educating society and using all cultural, social, and religious instruments in order to urge women or girls to have access to schools is better than using legal tools. And also, and when the school is far, for example, girl or mothers and fathers wouldn't really encourage girls to go to schools because they are too far. So such an issue must also be considered, and I thank you.
Rwanda, and then Egypt, and then we go to Seychelles, then Mozambique. Where is Madam Toma? Has she left the hall? Mozambique, you are there. And then Uganda, and then Djibouti, and then we end up with Rwanda, and then the third vice president, the second vice president wants to have a bite. Then we go to you, we go to you. But we are now limiting. We are now limiting your questions, your intervention to 3 minutes. I am going to stop you after 3 minutes. Please, let us, so that we give chance to the others to also contribute. 3 minutes, nothing more, nothing less. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
I thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor. Just a small correction. I'm from Burundi. I'm Gulios from Burundi. I will start first by thanking the two presenters for their good presentation. In general, we said that the education of young girls from the primary level to university is key to girls' empowerment. But the issue here is about sensitization. That is, based on this presentation, what are the strategies, what could be set up in order for young girls could have access to school, to the universities with quite a high percentage, because up to now in the primary and secondary schools, for example, back home, there is a parity at the level of these two levels, but it's not the case for the universities. And what should be done in order to keep those girls in schools? We have passed a law against violence against women, on violence against women, and our constitution has been amended that a pregnant girl could, after a year, go back to school. And also, but with the problem of poverty, it is very difficult for this pregnant girl to go back to school because she will face difficulties in feeding her new baby. So I think that we need to set up a strategy in order to encourage girls to go to school. I don't think that there could be any family that would prevent their daughters from going to school. My second concern is that there was a mention of the 5 Pan-African universities, which are conditions of access to these universities. Here also, I would like to recommend that there should be a partnership with national universities, because in our countries there are a lot of universities, in order to multiply the infrastructures and so that there could be an easy access to higher education. Thank you.
For sticking to your 3 minutes. Yes, Egypt.
شكرا سيدة.
I thank you, Madam President. There has been a lot of active participation on this theme. This proves that there is a parity in PAP between men and women. In Egypt, we have started education of women very early. In 1938, Sheikh Nafa Taqawi has written a book encouraging girls and boys to join schools. After 30 years, Qasim Amin has written a book entitled The Liberation of Women, where he called for equality between men and women in all areas. In the Constitution of 1956, Nasser has granted all political and economic and educational rights to women. And now at the University of Cairo, where I work for the last 45 years, the percentage of women teachers is more than 50%. That is 54%. That is, and this is the largest university in Cairo. That is 4,500 students. And also, in the revolution of the 11th of July, women have had a very active participation in fighting against extremism. And women have been successful in joining the Egyptian parliament that is occupying 1/5 of the seats. And now women have become magistrates, lawyers, and physicians, and they're involved in all areas. And we have the first commissioner of the province of Buhaira, which I am from. And the issue is not only political. And this is why in the Egyptian constitution that was adopted after the revolution, we have been able to raise the percentage of expenditures on education. And in our new financial year, 2017-2018, there we will allocate 4% of the GDP to education. And also to increase, and there has been an increase of 40% in comparison with the budget of last year. So I think the legal framework is important, but also awareness is even important. Thank you.
And we'll come to this side, Uganda, Djibouti, and then we'll go back to Paula. So,
Thank you, Madam Chair. During the presentation, the 40th plenary of SADC, and this is a good initiative. She also talked about discrimination. It reminds me of the situation of girls' education back home. We have a free education system up to tertiary education, and the percentage of boys vis-a-vis girls are more or less the same. We have girls that excel boys at university. Because we have a compulsory education system up to secondary 4, this itself closes the gap and helps to reach the equal level of education for both boys and girls. The education system also accommodates for girls that has fallen pregnant to go back to school, and this has allowed many girls, instead of dropping out after delivery, to go back to school and pursue their education up to university with support of the social services. Intake at university is almost equal. And in 2003, it's good to note that the intake at university for girls was more than boys. It was also good to note that the UNESCO has rated Seychelles as the only country in Africa that has achieved education for all. And according to a statistic done in 2012, Seychelles has reached 94% literacy rate. I can affirm that Seychelles will support any initiative which will help advance the education of girls. I know that we haven't ratified the Maputo Protocol, but after this session, it will be our responsibility as MP to go back to our country and see what we can do so that we can also ratify the Maputo Protocol. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. From Mozambique, Honorable.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President of the Pan-African Parliament. When I was speaking to my colleague from Chad, I actually was a little bit concerned because I don't think he is imagining, I don't think he can imagine that the situation since the times of his grandfather. We women at the time, we weren't allowed to study. Women were not supposed to study. They said that only men had the right to study, and women had to look after the home. I think he's forgotten that. And not only that, even today, in our time, who still continues to be very privileged as men. But I think people also forget that women have an added responsibility in society. When a man gets married to 2 or 3, 4 women and has children, who looks after these children? Women do, because this particular man can't look after all those children. Who in fact brings up the children? Who looks after the health of the children? Who looks after them every day? Their clothing, everything. It's women. It's women who do that. Men don't do that. They, in fact, the tendency is actually to leave the woman, to abandon a woman, and to have children elsewhere. But that woman then remains alone with the children, and she continues to take care of her children. And not only just to take care of them, she has every responsibility for these children. If we ignore the education of women in terms of education itself, in terms of schooling, we are actually ignoring society. Because who looks after society today? It's women. Women take care of society. What we want is not discrimination against men. All we want is the balance, that whether it's women or men, they should grow together in the society, because the majority still are women. If we only give privilege, or if only educate men, we are discriminating against women. Because, in fact, the highest number of illiterates are women. It's not men. And in all countries, in fact, if we actually go into do statistics, you will see that it is women, in fact, are often the highest number in terms of illiteracy because of what used to be done in the past. So we still inherited that from the past, and we are, of course, trying to change some of those negative aspects of the past, the society of our grandparents, to see where the women, in fact, can actually claim her own space. So it's very good that we are here talking about such instruments as education for girls and women. In fact, everybody should be very grateful that we are doing this. They should be grateful to women for looking after children. It is women today who brings up children, so that children, for example, are not HIV positive. Men don't have that courage. And it is if a woman doesn't go to school, when is she going to teach her child not to be HIV positive? So when we talk about early marriages, who suffers? It's the woman who suffers. When men, for example, sorry, women are the ones who, in fact, bear the brunt of that. So I wanted to say to colleagues, please don't be so surprised, and please don't worry about all these instruments which are, in fact, defending the women's rights, in fact, to go to school. We, in fact, need to help you to educate society.
Uganda, Jackie.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. I want to take this opportunity to thank the presenter who has keenly elaborated on the 1979 CEDAW Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, areas of Maputo Protocol, and of course the African Youth Charter. And definitely these are areas that guide our day-to-day legislations in our member states. And I would appreciate, as members of the sitting parliaments, to get the shortfalls on the countries that have done very well, because I know that, like she explained, there are countries that have done very well in terms of women emancipation. And in Africa, I would say Rwanda is leading. Uganda is doing very well, because in Uganda, actually, disability, youth, and women are represented in all structures, right from down up the top. Also in education, they give, when you're joining university, an additional point for you to compete in regards to joining university. But I think that our challenges remain on the implementation, because the Youth Charter explains the areas where member states should really take keen interest. To date, some member states do not even have youth councils that are supposed to oversee activities of the young people. And implementation, some member states do not even have the youth policies in place. So I think that it is very relevant information, and it would be very good to give us those gaps. Since we are sitting members of parliament, we could have impact through coming up with the private members' bill, so tasking the executives to put this in place. But in a nutshell, I want to say that our era has gone. This is an era of competition. Whether you are a female or a man, you are able to compete in terms of either education in class. I know of the best brains in the world, and there can never be no woman. I know of the best brains in schools, and women are taking lead. I don't think that this is a time for us to rattle. Let us address the gaps. And I think that these very men we sit with, our fathers, our brothers, the heads of states, our different relatives, and they are produced by a woman. I want to imagine that there can never be a man without a woman. So I think that we only need to realign our ideas, because every year CEDAW sits to review performances. But I think this remains just at the UN headquarters in New York. I would love to see impact at the grassroots. And these grassroots impacts can only be transformed when we domesticate all these.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would like to thank the presenters. I would also like to thank the CIEFFA also for this workshop. I would like to address the issue of the rural young girl. Rural young girls don't have the same chances that girls have who are brought up in big cities. In Djibouti, there has been a program for rural young girls so that this young girl can, in fact, go to school. And that particular program has been extremely beneficial. If one actually goes to schools, to rural areas, and goes to schools, and if we create schools, of course, we're going to give girls a chance. Normally, we would give boys a chance to go to school in cities. I also would like to share with you the experience of my country. In terms of parity, parity has really increased in Djibouti, certainly in the last decades, by putting in place a program which in fact closes the gaps in education in rural areas. Professional training is actually given to young girls as well as it is given to young men who in fact did not have a chance to be educated. What one does is that they have a specific education program, a specific training for these young people. And what I wanted to say is also that for us Africans, what is needed is that we need to integrate young girls and men in the rural areas so that they have the same opportunities as those who live in urban areas. Sorry, sensitization is also very important, and certainly with our parliaments and with the Pan-African Parliament, we need to sensitize all these issues so that we can put in place all the legal instruments, and we need our states, of course, our countries, to sign, and that so that we can all be involved in the advancement of this particular area. Thank you.
The last three. 1, 2. My sister from Burkina Faso has been. Burkina Faso, number 3. Burkina Faso, number 3. Rwanda, number 4. Namibia, number 5. That is the cutoff point, and then we come to the second vice president, and then we conclude. So because we are really now like 45 minutes behind time. So we'll have all those, and then the second vice president will give her intervention. I will have my last say, and then we'll give the presenter to comment. In that order, thank you.
Merci, Madame le Président.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would like, first of all, to thank the presenter for all the instruments that, in fact, are in existence for girls. I would like to speak a little bit about my country in terms of the schooling of girls. I would like to say that I'm from Gabon, and to say very simply that in Gabon there is no discrimination between men and women. School is compulsory from the age of 3 to the age of 16, and in fact there is a law that was promulgated in 2012 to allow schooling, in fact, for life. So in fact, if there have been any losses in terms of time, the particular person, the adult, can actually go back to school at any given time. Now, in terms of classes from primary schooling and to secondary schooling, girls are in fact more numerous than boys. And this, in fact, changes, of course, in the second cycle, unfortunately, of the secondary school. And unfortunately, we're not able to retain the girls. It could be poverty, it could be environment, it could be precarious conditions of living. It could also even be the new technology of information, which can, in fact, lead to deprivation. In order to allow for girls to continue their schooling, for example, if the girls fall pregnant, the state has in fact put in place a structure which allows the girls, in fact, to have their children looked after for a very small amount of money. So all I'd like to say to finish is that states, in fact, should work towards a system where every citizen has a minimum of training to ensure the well-being, social well-being. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President. I particularly retain a particular aspect which was mentioned by Ruth, which is how culture, in fact, can influence education for girls, which is very true. But I have to say that the variety of cultures which, in fact, make part of a society can also enrich the vision of education and the vision of policies, and also the right of education given to girls. I would also very briefly like to speak about the education system in my country, where we do benefit of a very equal system and very inclusive, where there is the legal framework. In fact, there is the same structure, the same education structure, where access to education is given to all children, whether they be girls or boys, and where also the system of education is compulsory until the age of 16. It is also to be noted that girls' performance is in fact very often better than a boy's performance. It's often to do with it, but the choice of subjects continues to be non-scientific, and research perhaps will be able to help us with this particular choice. But there is something that always astonishes us. It is always women, of course, who spend more time in the kitchen. But in hotels, in fact, the greatest chefs are often men. So this is quite strange. Does it mean that gastronomic studies, in fact, attract more boys than girls?
Thank you. Burkina Faso, and then Rwanda and Namibia, and then we'll close from that side.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would like to say that my concern, in fact, has already been answered because I wanted to talk about the legal instruments. But I think Honorable Asmo, in fact, has spoken about it, so I would like to give the floor to a colleague. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would first of all like to congratulate the presenters. In Rwanda, we do not, in fact, experience discrimination where education is concerned. When education is compulsory and free, whether it be for primary or secondary education. I would first of all like to respond to something that has been said. In fact, we've spoken a lot about a variety of initiatives, and we've spoken about initiatives for young girls. It is up to us, in fact, to legislate. It is up to us to, in fact, disseminate and to bring the attention, in fact, of our politicians towards the correct actions. Very often, political will is, in fact, the primordial condition which will lead us to change. For countries who are more advanced or countries who, in fact, have good governance, you will see that there are very few problems where education is concerned. You will see that laws and policies in terms of gender are also very important to be able to respond to this political will. Our constitution, for example, stipulates that the age for marriage be 21 years. Affirmative action, also reinforced by integration, also put in place the right integrations to accelerate results and to also guarantee its duration. And also to say that our education, for example, is free. That also is very important towards the advancement and promotion and development of women in our country. To give you an example, in Rwanda, in terms of mobilization of the communities, in terms of the education of young girls, and particular attention is actually given to girls. On Women's Day, the minister very often promotes, in fact, the interests of women, and there are lots of women's organizations, and they together prepare activities towards the mobilization of communities, particularly rural communities, to promote the education of young girls and women. And amongst these activities for Women's Day, this is particularly in March, and there is a very important activity which is by the First Lady, where she awards prizes, in fact, to the best students at primary school and secondary school, those who have achieved excellent results. And this is a practice that encourages young girls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair Lady. Let me argue a bit from a different angle. And in the meantime, also allow me to join the other colleagues, honorable members, who thanked the presenters. I must say it was a very comprehensive and well-articulated presentation. Now, when you look at the content under page 2 in this small booklet, allow me to quote, and it says, in many African countries, girls face a distinctive set of barriers to learning, especially when they reach post-primary level of education. Girls drop out from schools for many reasons: early marriage, and pregnancy, gender-based violence in and around schools, poverty, household costs, shows lack of gender-sensitive living content and environment. And then when you look at the objectives of the whole programs, it says mainly it is to promote girls and women education at primary, secondary, and tertiary education. Now in Namibia, I think we have a bit of a different system, and that is the system that we consider and emphasize more on early childhood development. And I was really wondering as to which stage does this project bring in the early childhood development. And I think also early childhood development for young children at a direct of an overall development, and on the adult they will become once they are grown up. And that is why understanding of the need to invest in a very young is so important, so that to minimize or to maximize their future well-being. So I was just trying to ask the presenters of the program as to whether they will highlight a bit to us as to what is then to happen to the early childhood. And I think that's where the grooming should start from, being also the feeder system. So I should say I thought it should be my intervention at this point in time. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Fourth Vice President, for giving me the floor. I would like to join my voice to my colleagues to thank the two presenters who, in fact, really educated us. I would like to just add my voice to what was said by my colleague from Djibouti. We know very well that many legal instruments have been promulgated in our different countries, from asking the age for young girls, of course, should be, in fact, from 16 to 18, by forbidding, of course, early marriages, by trying, in fact, sometimes to put into place strategies which would add value, or like affirmative action in certain countries to be able to remedy the situation, and also to give families, in fact, also the possibility of free education, free books, and even in our country, in fact, to feed, in fact, the children or their families so that girls can stay at school. But the question we do ask ourselves is, what is the role of members of parliament where these objectives are concerned? I feel that we have an essential role to play, and it is we need to evaluate the impact of these legal instruments, certainly in terms of our constituencies, and also in whether if there is an issue of drafting, of elaborating, of drafting strategies to be, which would be adapted, in fact, and would be very much targeted for our constituencies. The second point which I would like to raise here is that our governments be able to, in fact, to monitor these laws that they promulgate, and there should be a holistic approach. What do I mean by a holistic approach? I mean that our governments should be able to put into place for example, in rural areas particularly, education, and education that should be successful, and it should be, of course, accompanied by health. We need to have drinking water. So in terms of rural areas, we need a lot of other elements which need to be monitored. And I think that we need to have that holistic approach, and that is how we'll be able to, in fact, reach our education objectives. Thank you very much.
Second Vice President, let me end this discussion by just adding one or 2 points. I think the compendium has been very exhaustive, but I would like Madam to consider a very important also framework, that is the UN Convention on Persons with Disability, and that convention, especially Article 5, which talks of equality and non-discrimination. Article 6 talks specifically of women, disabled persons, and Article 24 talks on education. I think it's very important because women who are disabled are triple discriminated. One, they are discriminated because they are a woman. Two, they are discriminated because they are disabled. And three, because they are disabled female persons. So they face a particular special discrimination. So I think that article is very, that framework is also very important. And then I think in all of the frameworks we have mentioned, there is reporting mechanism in all of them, reporting obligations, because that is the only way we will monitor the implementation. The reporting obligation starts at either your accession to those documents or when you have ratified, there's an initial report and there are periodic report. And in those reports, you are asked to provide specific information to really help those institutions to see whether in fact you are implementing very well. And after the report, you know, there is a follow-on assessment report to the state parties, and state parties are required to read those reports to implement those gaps that have been identified. Of course, there are also tools, monitoring tools that have been available. We have the CSW annually where a lot of women go. That is one monitoring mechanism where state parties report on their implementation. Of course, using a gender disaggregated data, there's gender analysis, there's gender mainstreaming, and even in our constitution, you know, a lot of constitutional review is going on. That is one monitoring mechanism, whether in fact countries are putting affirmative action in their constitution or in their legal instrument. So all of these monitoring mechanisms are there. So we want to know exactly how effective are these monitoring mechanisms, and how do we improve on these monitoring mechanisms and tools. So for better capturing the implementation of most of these compendium of frameworks that you have really discussed with us. I thank you. I now give you the floor, madam. Sorry, you want? Madam? No. Do you want? Yeah, she's. We give her the floor. Yeah, we are giving her the floor. Yeah, she's the one that presented. You want? No, we finish, yeah.
I wish to thank you. Those comments were very valuable. Will go a long way to enrich the document, which Dr. Rita is working on. One thing which I need really to highlight, most of them were comments. I want to put emphasis that it's not about a fight between men and women, girls and boys, because we need to coexist with each other. All we are trying to emphasize is to ensure that we create an environment where both girls and boys, women and men can thrive. Let us create equal opportunities for all of us. That's what we're talking about when I talked about issues of equity. And I also just wanted to highlight that these documents that Rita is working, I'm getting the support from Rita to work. It's work in progress. It is not cast on a stone. We'll continue to implement, or improve the document based on what we discuss from the forum, because it is a document that supposed to be helpful for all of us. And because of your role as parliamentarians, it is important to engage in this forum because you are the sole power of legislation. And when you legislate, you make impact on various issues. The problem which we have here is that this instrument that I was trying to highlight, there is no specific one which is addressed on girls and women's education. They're very general. And if it is general, is there something which can be done better to make it more succinct so it is easy to get government more accountable? And that can only again come from parliamentarians when you introduce private member bills or the government bills, to ensure that you have a very clear framework that addresses girls' and women's education in the respective countries or even at the continental level. Because we know that even with the presence of this particular legislation that I highlighted, that has not stopped discrimination against women in the education sector. So that means the law itself or the instrument itself is not the ultimate solution. We need multifaceted approaches or different approaches that we combine with legislation to make it work. Because even if our constitution does not talk about discrimination, we still face subtle discrimination within the systems, even within our legislation. Even if you say women are magistrates, they are judges, even those women themselves, because they don't appreciate gender, they also create problems for women. So we need to understand what we want, where we are going, where we have come from, to be able to get this what we want in a better way. That is the message I want to leave. And because you're parliamentarians, you are very powerful in your role in getting for women the change that we want. Change that is going to be better for both men and women, girls and boys, because we are brothers and sisters. We are your mothers, we are your wives. We are many things to you. So all we need is support from all levels. And girls' education can never be a success unless we have the support of the men within this room.
Thank you very much. Let's give her a big hand. I think we have come to the end of this session, and I have been asked to inform members that we shall have a group photo before going out. I don't know where that photo is going to be. Can the photographers tell us where that group photo will be? Where? Do we go outside? Or we do it in here? Yeah.
Merci, Madame.
I thank you, Madam President. I would wish that before leaving for this lunch break, if we could conclude all our proceedings, because oh yeah, no, it's over. It's over. It's over. Thank you, Madam.
About that, because if you look at your program, there should be a presentation by the committee chair on education, and then there is another presentation on the AU gender architecture from Ms. Ramatullah Yaye. So I think those are the two presentations that will come back. But don't also forget that we have our communique. We cannot come here and work and don't have a communique really pledging our action after here. So that communique is also very important. So we are coming back. Yeah, so we are coming back by 2:30. So let's have the group photo. 2:30, we go and have our lunch. We come back here to conclude our session. Group photo, where? Outside. Where? Here? Here?